All right, this is going to be the spiciest FV panel ever. Well, we'll see if we can deliver on that. All right, so the general context for this panel is how can formal verification improve Web3 security? And I thought we would maybe start by just having all the panelists introduce themselves, say a little bit about either the project they work on or how they use formal verification day to day, just so you can kind of know who we have. So you want to go ahead and start, Ghila?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Ghila Castelnuovo. I work in Certora. Actually, I have a vast experience from the Web2 security. This is where I come from. I was 8 years in this field. And Certora is, first of all, a security company, and this is what we do. We want to protect the Web3 ecosystem, and we use formal verification in order to do that. We have a lot of formal verification experts in our company, and of course, we implemented the Certora prover, which is based on formal verification. And also, one of our goals is to educate people to use formal verification in order to check the security of a smart contract. So this is also kind of our mission when working with the community. So I hope it answers your questions. So nice to meet you.
All right.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Jon. I'm the CTO of Veridise, and so Veridise is a security and auditing company, and so we perform audits in a number of different parts of the blockchain ecosystem, including like smart contracts, ZK circuits, low-level blockchain implementations, and so on. And so we're also particularly interested in building tools because that's what many of the people in the company, have a background in, and so we commonly use tools in order to aid in the auditing process, and one of the tools that we use is formal verification. And so that means for things like smart contracts, we will formally verify critical portions of contracts in order to make sure they're secure and that there are guarantees. And then for ZK circuits, we commonly use more semi-automated or manual methods in order to formally verify that circuits are actually constrained correctly and are implemented in a way that's consistent with the developer's understanding.
Hello, I'm Fraser. I'm the CTO at Cubist, and I'm also faculty at CMU. I actually do more verification in my academic life, where I focus a lot on verifying small pieces of security-critical production systems. But at Cubist, we've been working recently on a key management system, and we're using verification to prove properties of that system. We've also used the Certora prover to prove some properties of liquid staking contracts, and we're collaborating with Veridise potentially on some policy checkers for user policies around key management.
I'm Grigore Rosu. I'm the founder and CEO of Runtime Verification, also professor of computer science at UIUC. My specialty is programming languages, formal methods, formal verification, and Runtime Verification was the company that first audited Uniswap, formally verified Uniswap, also the beacon chain, the deposit contract. We develop formal verification tools and techniques and foundations. For us, foundations are very important. We need to understand why things are correct and why even formal verification tools are correct. Because we've seen so many bugs in verification tools. We saw Paulina's talk. Many formal verification tools don't find the bugs, or if they find the bugs, sometimes they are just false alarms. It's important to understand things from a very foundational perspective in our view. Performance, yes, is important, but to us, performance was never the critical aspect. It's more important to have the right techniques, correct by construction, and then performance always comes. This is something we humans are really good at, to improve performance, once we know what we're doing.
Cheers. Hello, I'm Julian. So I'm the head of formal verification at Nethermind. So Nethermind does a lot of things in the Web3 space, but on the security side, we focus mostly on auditing, monitoring, and formal verification, which is what I do. And currently, our primary focus is on ZK circuit verification. So we have a variety of extractors for various ZK circuit description languages into various proof assistants, particularly the lean proof assistant. And we then can do partially automated and then with some, interactive manual assistance for the verification. And currently, which is something I'm quite excited about, we're working on verifying the RISC-0 ZK-VM.
All right, great. So a lot of interesting backgrounds here on the panel. And I thought maybe we'd just kick things off with, just very directly, like, why should Web3 projects use formal verification at all? So many other tools out there. I came from Web 2. We never really did formal verification there. So why should Web3 be using formal type methods? Anybody want to take a start?
I guess I can do it.
Go for it.
Yeah, so formal verification is very important because basically what you have is you've got very complicated code, and people are writing these protocols that have that require some very strict invariants hold. And if those invariants don't hold, then the entire protocol is going to break down. And so that's where formal verification is very useful. It can verify in a very strict sense that the invariant that you need to hold in your protocol will hold at all times. And therefore, that is great for preventing hacks and stuff like that, because there's a lot of people who are very incentivized in order to try to make sure invariants don't hold or corner cases are exploited. And all of these things are things that formal verification is built to reason about and to formally ensure are consistent with your understanding and that your logic is actually implemented correctly.
I would like to add something here. I think that the Web3 ecosystem actually is a very good application on where a bug can be very expensive. First of all, the exploit itself usually involves some stealing of money. So this is why it's very important to have the code properly verified by a formal verification. And also fixing the bug can be expensive too, because we are speaking here about upgrades, and we had a lot of talks about that and how complicated upgrades can be. And also, I think it's a very good application because, first of all, the code is open source. So in a certain sense, it's also more vulnerable because many people are looking at that and looking for bugs. So it's very important to have many eyes looking on that, also good eyes, and of course, formally verifying the properties that we're interested in. And of course, the fact that the code is open source makes also, it makes easier to have it formally verified from many different people and also from auditors. And the third thing, which applies to the Web3, and it's not always right for the other areas in computer science, is that the code is small. So we know that formal verification is actually a hard task and can be hard to do it, like a very complicated system. But usually in smart contract, since the price of having big code is high because of the gas, then it makes the code smaller, and it makes the life of the formal verification tools easier. So this is why I think it's a very good application of formal verification.
Yeah, great answers there. Any other panelists want to add anything to that?
I guess I just want to echo that third point. You can. That's amazing. I mean, if you're working on a web browser, good luck. You can't formally verify anything. That kind of sucks for you. But here, you can do it. So why not at least try, right? There are plenty of good tools that just don't exist in other areas. So worth a shot.
All right, so sort of moving on logically, so we've told projects why they should be using formal verification, but now they say, okay, well, I've got formal verification, that's one thing, but I want to also do security audits, and I want to do fuzzing, and I maybe want to do some economic simulations, and I want to have funds left over for a bug bounty, and but they often operate under constrained budgets, unfortunately. Then we wish we had unconstrained budgets, right? So when you look at the trade-offs between formal verification versus these other tools, and maybe a project's looking like, oh, do I get an extra audit, or do I pay to have some formal verification done, or something like that? How should they kind of prioritize formal verification versus other techniques? Can you just do formal verification and nothing else? Does it replace everything? Or how do you think about those trade-offs?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that can be said there. So formal verification, I mean, despite the fact that it definitely scales a lot better in this area, it can still be a lot of work because, I mean, I think Giannis pointed it out at one point, like you need invariants. Invariants are very important here because sometimes even though the code is, smaller size and is actually more tractable, there are things that can mess a verifier up. And so depending on the type of technology that you're depending on, nonlinear arithmetic can get very complicated for at least automated verifiers. There's a question asked about that earlier. You can also have issues with loops and stuff like that. And so really what at least we recommend to clients typically is anything that is security critical. So anything that is going to be like storing money or maybe routing money or anything like that should probably be formally verified so you have those guarantees. But other tools are also great at finding bugs as well. So for that reason, we commonly use fuzzers, static analyzers, and stuff like that. And so like early in the lifetime of your project, it's great to use a static analyzer. It's great to use a fuzzer and property-based testing in areas that maybe aren't as security critical. And then for those components that you really need to make secure, that's normally where we recommend formal verification. And then for ZK circuits, we always recommend formal verification.
Personally, I can add that I don't think that that formal verification replaces anything, but it cannot also be replaced by anything. I think that there was a talk in the 101, maybe it was yours, that defined actually security by like layers, and you have to have all of them because each security layer will have like some holes. So no one of them is sufficient to have a whole security coverage. This is why I think that it's great to use formal verification, but when thinking about having your code secure, you cannot give up on anything. This is my thought. I know we are doing formal verification, but actually we are doing a lot of other stuff which needs to complete it, and also auditing. It's something very important after formal verification, and of course also verifying that the specifications are correct. It's also very important. So this is how I think it applies for formal verification.
So, yeah, agreed with everything. One aspect of formal verification that doesn't seem to be entirely clear, because many think that, I formally verify my code, so it is correct, is that formal verification really, what it really does for us is to help us identify the assumptions under which the code has the properties we think it should have. And that's extremely useful because it makes us aware how things can go wrong, and also what to monitor after deployment as well. So formal verification, yes, is a tool, an excellent tool that puts some rigor in the process. It helps us on many aspects, but we believe that the most effective use of formal verification should be under the hood. We believe that tools should be easy to use by developers, and they should use formal verification without even realizing they use formal verification. Same like you have type checking in programming languages, right? You use a type checker without realizing that you use a very complex algorithm under the hood that does something really that people put a lot of effort into. Same should be formal verification. We believe that it should be a smooth process from writing programs, writing tests, then fuzzing, then formal verification, then more properties. So it shouldn't be like formal verification or no formal verification. That's how I think it should be. But also you should have the full arsenal of formal verification tools at your disposal. If you really want to do heavy formal verification, to specify absolutely everything and verify absolutely everything, you should be able to. But most of the tools should just be consumers of formal verification techniques. And we should all put an effort into educating our clients how to use these tools themselves. If, as auditors, we should audit specifications, not code. That's what I think we should do.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And this doesn't, I'm now not talking exactly about smart contract verification, but at Cubist, when we're working towards verifying user policies, we start with these invariants you're talking about, and we can actually reuse them for fuzzing first. Then we can use them for lightweight static analysis. And then one day we can actually build on them for full-on verification. And we get like the benefit of that initial specification throughout the lifetime of the code, and we get stronger guarantees over time. So we found that really, really useful.
I love the points about, auditing specifications as well as, just the code itself. Like, I know of instances we had at Maker where, there was a bug in the code and the spec had just the exact same bug. And so you needed another technique to catch that, either review or a unit test. In that case, there really should have been a unit test in that one. But that leads me into another question I wanted to ask, which is kind of like, okay, specifications and provers, like these are yet more code on top of the code we already have. How can we have, high trust in, if the Certora prover or the KVM, spits out and says, yeah, the spec, is accepted, it looks good. How can we trust that? What measures are necessary?
So I can answer about the Certora prover. So first of all, it's really important, as you said, to review the specifications. Okay, in Certora, we also offer tools, but you can also have your own tools, for instance, to mutate the Solidity code and just to make sure that if the Solidity code has a bug, then the specification finds it, because sometimes this is not the case, because as you said, you can have a bug in the specification. So this is one option, which is like to mutate the Solidity code. And another option, and this is something that also we truly believe in it, is have as many people as possible to review the specification. This is why we are doing like this contest in which like as many people as possible are writing specifications, and recently we're even awarding people for writing specifications, because a prover can be amazing, but if the specifications are not good, then the security of the code will be as good as the specification. So this is a very important thing, and of course I truly recommend just to look at the violations. I mean, okay, so if you have a violation, let's just look at how it looks like. Does it really represent a real example that can happen in your contract? And another option also to look at the proof. I mean, we also offer a way to look at the pets that were actually evaluated, and this is something that we are working on and we really want to give to our customers, but I'm sure that also other tools offer that. So it's very important to as you said, as you can think, be paranoid about everything from the code itself to the specifications. So this is my point of view on this.
Yeah, so debugging specifications and also debugging verifiers in general is a very hard problem, because verifiers tend to end up being a very complicated set of code. I mean, it's normally relatively large, and it normally has a lot of dependencies, because you've got an SMT solver. You might be trying to perform optimizations with abstract interpretation. So there's a lot of areas where things can go wrong. And so what's important, at least in order to validate that your verifier is actually doing what you want it to, is to have like a proper benchmark set. And I think right now, most likely, all of the companies that have verifiers have their own internal set of benchmarks. I don't think that we really have a very good set of external benchmarks that everyone's evaluating on. I mean, in other areas, there are verifier competitions, which we don't have in this area, but I imagine every single company here has their own set of benchmarks that they're evaluating on internally. And at least for us, when we are checking to make sure the specifications that we write are correct, we go through a very similar process where normally if something says verified, then we start doing, we normally don't mutate the code, but we mutate the specification and start changing the specification slightly to make sure that if we mutate the specification in particular ways, we end up with expected counterexamples.
So, oh, sorry, a bit loud. The techniques that we use at Nethermind are mostly based on interactive theorem proving. So our trust base is the dependent type checker of whatever proof assistant we're using. Typically the extractor, because we'll have some piece of code that extracts your code into some version that Lean or whatever proof assistant can use. And of course, actually the formal definition of the language inside of the proof assistant. So for the extractor, typically it's a very simple piece of code. There's a sort of a one-to-one mapping there. Obviously, we set up fairly large test sets, etc. But it's something simple enough that it's not considered to be too dangerous a part of the trust base. The dependent type checker, in our case, we use mostly the Lean proof assistant, which has one of the largest corpuses of mathematics being formalized into it. So in terms of the amount of stuff that people throw at it to find bugs, I think it's, one of the better places to be. And in terms of the formal specs, we tend to, of course, make sure that our specifications for the languages, formal definition, is executable in some sort of way. And therefore, we can actually just, like John described, run it against some conformance tests, do fuzz testing, do a specification mutation, all of these sorts of things to see if we get the expected. So yeah, similar situation.
I've been in this field for 30 years, maybe, that reveals my age, maybe, and I've never seen communities of formal methods people agreeing on a specification language. So I think the only specification language I've seen probably is the SMT-lib, which is also used in SMT competitions. Other than that, there are lots of tools even for very simple formalisms, like linear temporal logic, which has only 5 constructs and different syntaxes, completely different names for the same thing. I think that will be a challenge, also for coming up with benchmarks for our tools. And I take this opportunity to say that, again, all my years I've designed lots of specification languages and I proved lots of theorems, which turned out to be useless in the end. It's very important to pick something simple that connects quickly to your audience mind. And I confess that I really like tools like Foundry. They are not formal verification tools by design, but they are excellent doors into the formal verification field. So if you write smart contracts, you should test. And if you test, you should go to the next level. You should write property tests, parametric tests, and you should use fuzzing, yes. And then just push another button next to fuzzing, symbolic execution, formal verification. And then you do formal verification without even realize you do formal verification. And I want to actually maybe kill a myth. There is a myth that property tests are weak. You cannot express any properties. So no, that's incorrect. Actually, property tests are as powerful as Hoare logic. Preconditions, code, postcondition. Assume, code, assert. So you can write any Hoare triple as a property test. So it's not like they are not expressive enough. They're expressive and they are practical and easy to use. That should be the entry point, I think, that we can build upon.
And I want to add on this. I was just discussing with security people, actually hackers think by properties. This is why it's very important that when you want to verify the security of your code, you also need to think by property in order to think about all the possible initial state and middle state that the contract can get into, because this is how attackers eventually will think like. So this is how we want to protect our code. So this is why I strongly agree with you, and this is why I think it's a myth, and I think that even if it's a myth, we need to start doing that to make our code more secure.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I've personally experienced, thinking in invariants or properties. It's very powerful when developing, and I also like, the vision of it should just be something, you just kind of do. You've already written a test. Why shouldn't you get a way to formally prove things? And I know that, yeah, there are a number of efforts along these lines. I mean, even at Maker, Polina actually, who gave the last talk, right, experimented with integrating symbolic execution into Foundry itself. But this is actually a good lead into the next question I wanted to ask, because, we aren't at this space age future where you've written some property tests and you just hit another button or run the right command and it's all automatically proven for you. Right now there are a lot of different ways that projects can decide to apply formal verification. They can hire a company to write all the specs for them. That company may or may not also be accompanying that with some sort of manual auditing effort. They might use a SaaS tool like Certora and write the specs themselves. They might do some sort of hybrid method where a company writes the specs for them, but then they maintain them afterwards. They can also do this earlier or later in the development process, et cetera. So there are a lot of different ways projects can use formal verification. I'm wondering if the panelists have any thoughts on which ones are optimal or which ones they would recommend in different situations depending on the needs of the project. Big question, I know, so feel free to collect your thoughts.
So developers definitely can and should be using formal verification. If they're, right now we don't really have a button that can press in order to perform symbolic execution from Foundry, but I know that's something Runtime is working on, and that would be something very powerful for developers. But developers aren't going to have the security mindset, and so really one thing is developers should try to do whatever they can to find bugs, and then after that, it's the security auditor's job to go in and basically try to exploit everything that they haven't. And I am of the opinion that auditors should be using tools like formal verification, fuzzing, and stuff like that in order to bring higher assurance audits to their clients, because all of those tools will, one, help the clients feel more, let's say, comfortable with the results of the audit, but also it's something that clients can then keep and move in the future or use in the future. And so yeah, I think that essentially it's important for everyone to do whatever they can. And I know that's not really a very satisfying answer. Developers should be using it. They should be, probably not using it quite as effectively as security analysts, but it's still useful and important to do. And there are going to be people who are going to become very proficient at it. And then for the properties that they're not able to verify, because you eventually are going to have to fight with a solver at some point or something like that, that's when a security company can step in and complete the formal verification and also review the specs that they have written and find the holes that they've missed. Because with most formal verifiers, if they haven't thought of an edge case and none of their specifications target that edge case, then it's going to be missed.
I completely agree here. The only addition that I would like to add is that I don't think that formal verification needs to be done only once. I mean, probably the goal should be to have it in your CI, because we actually saw with our customers that the code gets changed, and maybe they're working on another version of the same contract and things break. Even the simplest invariant can break, and this is something that actually CI can be very helpful in detecting it, because having the old code being audited again can be very expensive. But once you had the whole process you had the whole specification, then it can be very easy to just rerun the any formal verification tool on the same specification to just make sure that nothing broke. So as Jon said, I also think that should be from the beginning to the end, and maybe also in the deployment itself. I mean, I think it should be ideal to formally verify that also the deployed code adheres to the original specification, because we saw before that something actually gets broken during the deployment. So I think that also we should even verify the code that it's deployed in the blockchain, because it can be also very helpful there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about, verifying the actual deployed byte code, because, it is actually public, you can't usually verify what's, running on the servers you're interacting with, but in Ethereum you can. All right, so think we've made the case to everyone that, they should be using formal verification. There are lots of options. There are lots of ways to trust it. There are lots of ways to do it. Then how do we actually increase adoption of formal verification in Web3? Like, I think it is steadily growing, but, not all projects are using it yet. And, what needs to happen?
I think Grigore already answered that question, ease of use.
Yeah.
I think there's one other facet here, which is we're doing pretty well on the smart contract front, but there's a lot of other code that touches the ecosystem that is really, really important, and also not formally verified. And they're, maybe we think of this as more of a Web 2 problem. It's like, okay, your key manager code, that's just some Rust code or some C++ code or whatever. But that's really has to be right? Or like your MPC wallet implementation, that should not have bugs in it. So I think more focus on the non-smart contract pieces of the ecosystem would really help everyone.
Yeah, definitely agree there. Go ahead.
I think that I agree here, but I would like to add a point. I think it's also, we are like a community of formal verification, and I think that it will be great, like, to motivate people on why it is important. So, like, publish everything that could actually was actually found by formal verification. So we need to educate also about the motivation and why formal verification is important. And I think that like, we are pretty sure about that here, but probably the people in the ecosystem, they're not enough convinced yet. So I think that, like, having, like, motivating can be like publishing things and explaining where it actually helps, and in order to educate more people about why it's important.
Yeah, I think publicity can help a lot. Like, the more bugs that are found with formal verification, I think goes a long way. Like the talk from NetNel earlier about finding the bug in PRB math, right? I've audited code bases that use PRB math, and usually, you're told, like, oh, don't worry about the math, just focus on the business logic, because, the time is finite. But, it turns out you actually take a close look at that and write some specs, and there was some bug in the math, and, that's the best marketing, in my opinion. All right. I thought at this point, I can keep, interrogating the panelists a bit, but, FV is, mysterious, hard to understand. I thought we'd open it up maybe and see if the audience had any questions and wanted to ask any. All right, there's one there.
Yeah. At some point, one of you guys mentioned that blockchain is a great place to try formal verification because the code size is small. But with all these, like, scalability stuff, we expect that code will actually, hopefully, at least in my vision, should get as complex as a Web 2 server. How does formal verification scale going ahead in the future?
Yeah, so code might get bigger, or the size of the contracts might increase, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your transaction size might also be able to increase, but really, people have been able to do a lot with this kind of asynchronous model that we end up seeing here, where, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of functionality that you want to provide, where you want to provide someone with an entry point, and that's going to be doing something very specific. And so normally, people are already, I would say, to my frustration, designing code where you have an entry point, it does something very complex, it triggers like 20 actions, and then that is just going to make things more dangerous. So even though technically, things might increase, that also could end up having other side effects, like making the ecosystem less safe, I would say. And not that it's necessarily safe now, but I would be hesitant about having people write, this really complicated function where, someone's going to be, I don't know, executing 1 million instructions in a single transaction.
I just don't think we're going to also, or I guess another way of putting it is, say if proofs get good enough that we can really scale to huge systems, that means something fundamental has changed, and the relationship between like proofs and verification is deep enough. That probably means something has changed in verification too. So.
And I guess another technique that we could use at that point is abstraction, because I think that's an area that hasn't necessarily been explored that much in this particular area, because for the most part we've been able to reason very precisely about these things because of the code size, but we can always abstract over contracts in order to perform larger verification, which is what is kind of commonly done for larger systems anyway.
So formal verification is an old field, has been used in many other domains before, particularly in hardware verification. There are entire chips that have been formally verified. And the key insight in almost all instances where formal verification was successful on large systems was compositional verification, or divide and conquer. Split the system in components, verify them independently, and you can scale that way. I think formal verification in the blockchain space is just scratching the surface. It just started. There are fields where very large programs have been formally verified already.
Yeah, so if I can add to that, oh God, sorry, I'll get used to this. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we're verifying the risk zero ZK circuits, and that is of the order of hundreds of thousands of constraints. Right, and so a lot of the techniques that we've been talking about here would not scale very well to this. So once again, we rely very, very heavily on abstraction, being able to break down things into sub-gadgets, write specifications for them, and then really in the end, when we're reasoning about the high-level circuit, we're not really reasoning about circuits at all anymore, rather just how these specifications interact, these human-readable specifications interact. And yeah, so I think in ZK circuit verification, particularly where you can have very, very large circuits like this, compositionality abstraction is incredibly important. Although at Nethermind we do try and apply these same techniques to smart contract verification too, because yeah, as we said, you know, they're getting bigger with L2 and other scaling solutions. So.
I think we're also in a good position where there's been a lot of verified software already, and so we can build on what's already verified. That's great. It's kind of different from, say, the OS or browser world or something where you have like millions and millions of lines of legacy code, none of which is verified. And if you're just staring down that behemoth, it's like, okay, where do I even with abstraction, like, good luck. So we're in a much better beginning point.
So how does the complexity and difficulty of formal verification compare to the difficulty of figuring out what actual humans are going to do with this system and how that's going to go wrong? And what's the relationship between spec writing for formal verification and working out what crazy thing a user will do that turns out to be disastrous?
There are some works in that area where you combine, you actually formalize humans and they satisfy some physical constraints. You cannot very quickly move your hand from here to here, things like that. But in general, same like with verification in general, you have symbolic variables and then you do constraint analysis. Humans can do stupid things, and you have to take them into account. But there are people who do research in that area, human-computer interaction, and they have formal models of humans, even of organs in humans, like formal specification of your liver, and they, so.
Yes, thank you for the panel. Does it make sense to formally verify other components of the Web3 ecosystem, for instance, blockchain clients?
Definitely. So, Julian and I both mentioned how we formally verify ZK circuits all the time. Those can be integrated, kind of in with the smart contract, or it can be with the blockchain. And when it comes to formally verifying aspects of blockchains, that's definitely important. One of the first audits that we did, actually, we performed some like lightweight modeling and formal verification over that model of a blockchain, because it can be really important to understand how monetary assets, because again, money makes people greedy and then hacks, but how monetary assets are being exchanged, because you can end up with really bad bugs in blockchains, like double spend vulnerabilities and stuff like that. And so again, with a blockchain, it gets a lot harder because it's bigger, but that's where it comes down to isolating the critical components and then performing formal verification over those critical components, and then having a model of how other aspects of the system should interact with those, and maybe not verifying, but you could perform a more lightweight static analysis in order to ensure people are interacting with that component in a consistent and correct way.
In the same line of thoughts, is there some way that we can have a verification, formal verification for economic models? Where, I mean, we can create invariants for codes, but is it something that can be applicable to economic models? Or is this something that is completely out of the scope?
Actually, this is something we do even more at runtime verification than verifying actual code. We work closely with our clients to formalize their business logic, and then we prove properties about the models, or consensus protocols. You can prove properties about them, like they don't fork, without even looking at any line of code.
Yeah, starting at the model level can be really important as well, because if you're able to formally verify a model, then that can actually be used to help formal verification in the future. So if you can have specifications that describe the model, then when you actually write the code, you can actually reuse those specifications. And then another thing is, at least in this area, if you have some sort of abstract model or some, kind of high-level model of what is going to hold, one thing that we see pretty commonly is people mocking other contracts that you then have to formally verify against in some cases, which can be dangerous because that might not be the actual behavior of the contract. And so if you have some sort of model that you've performed formal verification on and you have verified that your underlying implementation is consistent with that, it means that now other protocols can even make use of it to abstract away your specific behavior and then use that when they are developing their own protocols which would interact with yours.
Yeah, I think in continuous cases you might have to accept some level of approximation because, for example, if you're really trying to address like a high-level economic behavior, like is my lending market always solvent? Well, you've got to model price behavior. You've got to make some assumptions about that. Like, are you going to assume geometric Brownian motion? Well, like that's not really true in practice, right? And so you may be limited at some point by assumptions, but you can usually do something, right?
Hi, thank you for a great panel. So I'm coming from the perspective of a smart contract developer and not a security auditor. There are lots of different types of tests to write, so standard like unit tests, fuzz tests, invariant tests, et cetera. And each of those comes with a certain model of how to look at the code, look at the design of the system and structure that test. Do you have any tips or general approaches towards extending testing from just that to using the symbolic tests of tools like Holmos or similar?
I think that it really depends on the language in which you are writing the specifications, because for instance in Certora, like the CBL language looks very similar to the Solidity code, and so it should be, like, I'm not saying that it's easy, but it should be quite intuitive to write the specification for one person who is actually familiar with the Solidity language. So I think it really depends on the specification language, and
So going from tests to going to specifications is actually something very powerful and something that we use when we're developing specs for clients, because Tests end up encoding the intended behavior. Normally, there might be some edge cases that weren't considered, but it at least gives you an idea of what the developers were thinking about. And so a very easy way to go from test to, let's say, a property-based test is to, instead of testing against a concrete value, make that more of a symbolic value, and now you can use symbolic execution, you could perform some sort of property-based testing. And so just even removing those concrete values, it can already get you part of the way to something more powerful than what you were starting with.
All right, we've got about a minute left. I wanted to sneak in one question of my own, which is actually inspired by the previous, but kind of flipped on its head. So if you're writing detailed enough specification, you're really getting into all the expected behaviors. Why do you actually have to write the code? Maybe you just write the specification and generate correct code from it. Is that science fiction, or
that's called program
that
synthesis?
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a separate field of study where you write the specification and then you have something generate provably correct code. And so Ishel, my advisor, is very interested in program synthesis, but that will take longer to discuss.
So not feasible yet.
Oh no, it's feasible. People do it all the time. It's just, it also has some scalability issues. And so like one of my projects that I did a long time ago is I wrote a synthesizer that went from our specification to smart contracts, but I think to synthesize an ERC20 circuit, it took about 4 hours. But that was something that I wrote in like a month, so.
Actually, I'm a firm believer that people should not write code. They should write specifications. And the code should be generated or... Actually, before being a professor, I worked at NASA as a research scientist for 2 years. And what I've done was synthesis, was schema-based synthesis. And we generated very large programs, thousands of lines of code. I think the largest was 50,000 lines of C code. And it was provably correct. It was a fragment of C provably correct from specifications for Markov models. So it is doable, especially for domains, specific domains, like smart contracts of a certain kind.
All right, well, that'd be really cool. Anyway, we're out of time, so let's have a round of applause for the panelists.